And so I said to him, don't you think that's promotional malpractice? Oh, hey everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat right here on MMAfighting.com. I am, of course, ARIEL HELWANI in our New York City studio. A great show planned for you, and I just realized, actually, we're surrounded by New Englanders. This could get dangerous. You guys worried?
Known for being dangerous.
For you. Yes.
Known for being dangerous.
Yeah, well, you shouldn't be worried. I should probably be worried. 3-on-1.
Yeah.
Plus beat my Buffalo Bills last week. Yeah, that's right.
We're outnumbered by the Manhattanites surrounding this building.
That's right. And a little tip of the cap to our good friend Luke Thomas. Had to get that word or that phrase out of the way at the top. All right, you know them. Let's introduce them and let's get right into it because a lot to talk about on this episode of the show. He is, of course, Jack Encarnacio, who is making his debut in this studio. You know him from the Sherdog Rewind show on Sherdog.com. Jack, welcome back.
Thanks so much.
What took you so long?
Busy lives. Busy lives.
Yes. Okay. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
We appreciate
Pleasure.
it. Of course, this man, backed by popular demand. The people loved him.
Yeah. My family likes to write comments and.
Jeff WAGENHEIM of Sports Illustrated, great to have him back. And then the man with the hat, Chuck Mindenhall of MMAfighting.com. How are you?
Good.
Holding it down back there.
Yep.
Okay, guys, lots to get to. On Wednesday, on UFC Tonight, it was announced that BJ Penn is returning to the UFC. He is not retiring. He will be coaching the 19th season of The Ultimate Fighter opposite Frankie Edgar, who he lost to at UFC 112, UFC 118. And not only that, when they do fight, it will be at 145 pounds. A lot to dissect here, but first let's just start with the news. Are you happy that BJ Penn, who Dana White just a few months ago said he didn't want to see fight again, are you happy he's back?
I think didn't want to see fight welterweights for no particular reason and get just bombed on because he's oversized. The era has passed where you can, make these massive jumps to larger weight classes and I think not be the worse for wear. But in terms of, I'm very excited to see BJ back. He's one of the few real true stars south of 170 that we've seen in the UFC. I mean, his title reign actually moved numbers. It got other people, other fighters that he went up against more popular, more noticed, and you couldn't get a nicer guy than Frankie for that. I mean, I've always felt bad for Frankie Edgar because he's such a terrific fighter, one of the absolute best lightweights we've ever seen, but the spotlight has always eluded the guy. He doesn't have a particular amount of charisma, but his fights are just so gritty and just so entertaining to watch, and he deserves the spotlight he's going to get. So all of those things factor into my feeling about BJ coming back because this is the fight. But yeah, BJ is just a guy who has always captured the imagination of the MMA fan since day one, and those guys are rare. And so if they're viable and if there's a fight that makes sense and people don't feel dirty watching a guy at his particular age and lot in life compete, then I feel good about it and I'm happy.
He mentions dirty. And BJ actually came up to me right after Anderson Silva was knocked out by Chris Weidman in July and said, remember, Ariel, because we were talking earlier about how Anderson considers him the best pound-for-pound fighter of all time. He said, remember, never been knocked down, never been knocked out. He's talking about himself. That's true, but he has been hit a lot. You feel good about watching him again?
Sure. I mean, I think that as Jack said, he's dropping down a weight class. He's not facing these guys who are just bigger, stronger guys. So he'll be able to compete if he can make that weight comfortably and be the fighter that he's been at 155 or at 170. I think that you also touched on the other side of it. What's in it for Frankie? And if you fight a guy that you've already beaten twice, what is it in it for you? And one thing that's in it for him is that spotlight. And the Ultimate Fighter is a spotlight. And love it or hate it, it's going to shine a light on Frankie that hasn't been shown on him even when he was the champion for quite a while. So I think that for both guys, it's an opportunity for BJ to erase this one ghost, or at least partially erase it. And for Frankie, it's a moment in the spotlight, because before you mentioned the two fights that Frankie won over BJ, I was trying to think back. I remember he beat him the second time in the Boston one. I was trying to remember the other one and what exactly what the scenario was. I think that was the Abu Dhabi fight.
Yes.
But those sort of escape us a little bit, and nobody's going to forget about this one because it's going to be on TV for a week.
And isn't it so, by the way, Chuck? Isn't it so, BJ Penn, to want to come back against a guy who he lost to twice, and then at a new weight class? It always takes these challenges that he doesn't really need to take.
It's not. He's a pebble in a shoe, from what I understand, not more than a prodigy. But honestly, it makes sense from him. Obviously, like he would like to go back and beat Frank Edgar. I wanted to touch on the Frank Edgar. What does Frank Edgar get out of it? Well, he gets that exposure from from TUF, Tough. He gets to do that. But at the same time, theoretically, he never really wanted to be a featherweight. He gets to have this platform. He's not going anywhere. He's not going to get another shot at Aldo anytime soon. Let's say he beats BJ Penn a third time. What could he do then? He could then maybe go back to 155 pounds where there's no longer a stop sign at the top. Now you've got Anthony Pettis at the top. He sort of can drop his own map at that point. I would think that the UFC would have to say, like, hey, you want to move up? You can. And I think ultimately that's what he would like to do. That's just my own theory, that he can use this vehicle to sort of move himself into the direction he wants to go in.
This, in my opinion, Jack, is the best use of Tough because it doesn't put a great fight on the sidelines for a very long time. Like, at the end of the day, Ronda Rousey has a massive layoff from her UFC debut to UFC 168, and I think that's somewhat unfortunate, although we'll get to her role on Tough in a second. Tough in the past has hung up guys who we wanted to see, but they had to go through the show, tape it, and then allow for it to air. Here we have a fight that no one was thinking about. Comes out of nowhere. You got a legend, and a guy you haven't seen in a while, so you have this platform to reintroduce him to everyone. A guy who can use the spotlight, like you guys said, and Frankie Edgar. It feels like this is the way you should use Tough. These kind of coaches, not title fights, not number one contender fights, these kind of fun fights. Do you agree?
Well, it's a fight if it needs to be a pay-per-view main event and move units, then Tough helps you expose these people so that people care about them more. Like the Dominic Uriah fight probably would have been bigger than their first meeting because they were on Tough and had exposure every week for 13 straight weeks before 1 million plus people. That's what it's about. People go on and on about Tough. Look, it's first of all about the coaches and making people want to buy their fight. Secondary is this happy accident that happened where the first 3 seasons they discovered these amazing diamonds in the rough, who actually 2 of whom became UFC champions, which no one handicapped at the time. And now everybody fronts as if they acted like that was the point of the show on the point of the show from the beginning. And now that that's not happening anymore, the show isn't any good, which is ridiculous. The show is out there to make the coaches who are already appreciable MMA names bigger stars, to give them a shot at selling to a greater audience weekly in a consistent time slot, which is really the key to making people come back to your product. The Fox Sports 1 launch has made it a little difficult to pull the kind of numbers they did in FX and Spike, considering how well established those networks were. But I think, bottom line, that's what Tough is for. It doesn't really matter if it's a title fight. It's just about whether a fight needs a boost and can Tough bring it to the fight.
And the truth of the matter is, it has to make 2 kinds of sense when you're booking the Tough coaches anyway. It never is going to be completely logistical, or it rarely would be completely logistical from just the meritocracy or from the pecking order, or way we look at matchmaking. There's two sides to it. The other side is it has to have some kind of drama to it. The matchup has some kind of drama to it, and they have to have guys that people want to see through a reality series, a whole season of reality series. Well, BJ Penn obviously has that. He's a guy who's going to come back. BJ Penn, we know his personality. He's good for that. So he's been on the show before. He's one of those guys who kind of is intriguing. If it's, if it's, say, somebody, I don't know, like if it's Benson Henderson or somebody like that, we don't know how that would actually go. But at least they have to draw it up that way. We've seen it in the past. There's been all kinds of complaints about the booking of the coaches. Chael Sonnen against, Jones. I mean, you could go. There's several examples of that didn't make complete sense from a matchmaking standpoint, but made a lot more sense in the context of a reality TV show.
And at least if they're not trying to always feed us one guy is having a beef with another guy, like the Misha Ronda thing is of course the latest example. But it's nice just to see these guys who are BJ Penn, a veteran of the sport, a guy who's a master at particularly one aspect of it, and really good at a lot of things. And Frankie Edgar, sort of a lunch pail, blue collar guy. How are these guys going to work with younger fighters? And that's something that's interesting. I'm not a big fan of reality TV, particularly as it comes down to MMA. But at least there's some intrigue as to what are these guys going to do as coaches.
That's part of it, but the most effective seasons of Tough are when the coaches can't stand each other and they're at each other's throats.
Sure.
I hope, for sake of Frankie Edgar's ability to make money off this fight, that BJ Penn is very aggressive and in his face and finds this kind of hatred. BJ Penn cannot get over a loss. He still wants to fight George St. Pierre. That's why he wanted to fight Rory McDonald, because he saw that as a springboard to have a storyline to fight GSP again after he got pretty well handled in 2009. So I think, BJ kind of comes from this really primal place of you defeated me and it was nonsense and I will defeat you. So that's what BJ's orienting principle is. It has nothing to do really with titles or anything like that. It never has.
Dana White says that he got the call from BJ saying that he wants to fight Benson Henderson because he thought that would be his springboard to Frankie. Dana said, forget about Benson, let's do Frankie now.
BJ, do you not know that Frankie dropped to 145?
That's right. Do you like that fight better, though? BJ versus Benson as opposed to BJ versus Frankie 3?
You know, in a way I do, but I'm almost more intrigued. I think what puts this over the top in the discussion is always that twist of him going to 145.
Yeah.
If he was just going back to 155, I think there would be a more limited appeal. I think that's fresh and new and interesting to see BJ at a different weight class, because you can think about an Aldo fight. You can think about all the guys at 145 that he's never come up against. And sure, I'd absolutely break down the doors and drop everything to see BJ Penn fight Benson Henderson. But I think that extra ingredient of 145 is important.
It's interesting to think in terms of Jeff, like if what happens if BJ Penn wins a fight or wins a fight narrowly, what they do in a situation like this. You can't just keep rolling back the two guys again and again and again. And there is a little bit of a logistic problem at the top there, you know, and the only real definitive thing that can happen is that Edgar wins the third time. Anything besides that becomes a little bit more like, well, are we going to do it again? You know, are we going to, you know what I mean? It gets murky after that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be more interested in seeing the Henderson fight just for the reason that we've seen these guys fight twice, and you know, Edgar beat him narrowly once, and then beat him pretty convincingly the second time. So, and now he's fighting at his natural weight class, at least the weight class that he's been told is his natural weight class, even if he doesn't always agree. Whereas BJ is coming down a weight class, so there is that level of intrigue. But in terms of the fight, well, BJ's natural weight class seems to be 155, and the guy who was the reigning champion, the longest reigning champion after him, just lost and is available. So that would have been the fight that I would have been more interested in, but I'm fine with this one. This would be fun to watch.
That he fought Machida back in the day.
Yeah.
Oh, right, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Do you think he'll be able to make 145? Do you think that'll be a good...
That's really one of the storylines.
Yeah.
You know, he has struggled a little bit. You know, his motivation, we've always talked about his motivation. You know, there's been a little bit of a struggle that way for him through his career. So that becomes one of the factors. You would hope that his motivation to get this Frankie Edgar thing under, you know, to redeem himself against Frankie Edgar would motivate him to get there. So I think he'll make it.
Motivation is one thing, but 170 pounds, these guys are too big for him, and he gasses out.
Yeah.
When BJ Penn is tired, picture BJ Penn being flat-footed, tired in the sitting duck. It's always at 170. 155 forced him to condition himself, because you can't come close to making weight if you don't train seriously from a cardiovascular standpoint. So I think 145 is probably even more of a likelihood that he's going to come in able to go 25 minutes like he did with Diego Sanchez and others at 155. I mean, that's BJ's problem as far as his reputation of running out of gas. It's 170. He can't fight 170. It just doesn't make any sense.
I remember being in Memphis after that win over Diego Sanchez and thinking, this guy is the best fighter in the world right now. He looked so good in that fight at UFC 107, and then everything changed after that, in my opinion. Guys, let's move along. This weekend's a very busy one in the world of MMA. No UFC events, but tons of others. But the real story, as far as combat sports is concerned, is Floyd Mayweather Jr. versus Canelo Alvarez, one of the biggest boxing matches in recent history. And I'm wondering, when I think of this, and we'll get into, you know, whether or not you guys are interested in this fight as just, you know, fans. How far away, in your opinion, is the UFC/MMA, but really the UFC right now, from putting on an event like this?
It's a good question, because I think it has a lot to do with the different ways in which MMA and UFC in particular are set up vis-a-vis boxing. There isn't quite the same incentive to work as hard as Floyd Mayweather does on promotion, because he doesn't get $5-10 a buy. It's not completely built around him. And look, there's more upside to the way the UFC does it than downside, but this is one downside if you're the caliber of Floyd Mayweather. First, you need a guy who's undefeated and can point that out with a ton of arrogance every single time a microphone or a camera is in front of his face. I mean, this is all, in a lot of ways, about how immensely gifted Floyd Mayweather is at every single aspect of being a combat sports superstar. If someone comes along who has the skills to be undefeated and has that ability to project and rally some other constituency, like the Mexican-American boxing fan base behind Canelo, or behind Juan Manuel Marquez before that, or the Philippines behind Manny Pacquiao, I mean, that's the dynamic at play. You've got this guy who's ultra cocky, ultra confident, able to express it, works extra hard to tell everybody about it and get out in all those media. And then you get this guy who kind of creates this stir and this population. I envision it as kind of like some dominant, arrogant American champion, and some Brazilian guy comes to challenge him, and, you know, it's just like the MGM is 50% Brazilian. Like it's going to be 50-75% Mexican on Saturday.
But do you think they're far away from that?
Yeah, I'm inclined to say never, but you know, we never say never. But you know, I went on to a very popular website, sort of a hub for buying ticket stubs for sporting events, and I was looking for something else. I was actually looking to see what the Giants tickets are for when they smashed Chuck's Broncos over this weekend. But I ended up seeing tickets for Mayweather, and I thought, I'm going to check this out. So ringside seats start $25,000.
Right.
Wow.
So then I switch over to the UFC. I'm looking, okay, how can I compare apples to apples? Well, I'll go to the November fight, George St. Pierre, their leading light of their biggest draw, in the same exact arena in Las Vegas. Ringside seats start at $2,500. So we're talking like 10 cents on the dollar, the difference. I mean, boxing is a big splash sport. You know, once this fight finishes on Saturday night, you're not going to hear hardly anything about, you know, the everyday boxing. You don't hear UFC has all these title fights lined up before the end of the year. In between them, they've got all these Fox shows and other shows, and people who are into the sport are really into it. Boxing isn't built that way. You're not going to hear much at all about anybody until the next Floyd Mayweather guy comes along. Nobody cares about those other guys, but they care about Floyd. So if you're asking, when is the UFC going to get a Floyd Mayweather kind of splash? I don't know that's ever going to happen, but they make a lot of little ripples that add up to something.
It would require like a fundamental alteration. That's what I said about the small downside. It would require like a fundamental alteration in how front and center an MMA fighter can be. I mean, let's face it, you know, you're not going to ever see you're not going to see the UFC build its entire organization and biggest fight of the year buzz around one particular fighter. They want to have 3 to 4 to 5 guys like that they can point out as must-see fighters. And, you know, they'll never say any of their cards aren't must-see, but you take my point. It's just not set up the same way.
And it's even more fundamental than just that. With boxing, your grandfathers knew what boxing was. Your great-grandfathers knew what boxing was. Chances are they may have been fans of some of the big stars coming up in the day. Generationally, we've been following boxing. We know what boxing is. The pageantry that goes with boxing and everything about the prize ring still goes through boxing. I think that's part of our pop culture consciousness, to be like, we understand what boxing is. Casual people know what boxing is.
Right.
Not everybody knows what MMA is at this point. There's still times that I'll meet people on airplanes, wherever, who, you know, you get into a conversation about mixed martial arts, they still think it's a choreographed wrestling thing, or it's affiliated with the WWE or something like that. They don't really fully understand. Not every casual person you come across understands what MMA is, and I feel like just fundamentally that sport has to seep into our consciousness a little bit more at some point to get to that point where everybody would be casually interested in a fight like this one that's about to go down this weekend.
And so, in my opinion, it's very interesting because we have this fight, which I'm very excited about. You guys are going to watch it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I question anybody who doesn't want to see
With the World Series of Fighting on? No way.
Yeah, well, no, but they actually moved themselves up early,
Okay,
so they're all there. Everyone bows to Floyd, even the UFC on that Fox show on May 5th.
That's true. Although, let's not even get into the fact that they shouldn't even be on that date, World Series of Fighting, but that's an NBC Sports Network decision, a very strange one. But it's interesting because following week, Jon Jones is fighting. And in my opinion, Jon Jones is the guy, if there's ever going to be a mega fight, he has to be a part of it. Whether it's Jon Jones, Cain Velasquez, Jon Jones versus someone we don't know, Jon Jones, Anderson Silva, Jon Jones, Chris Weidman at MSG, who knows? Jon Jones is the guy who's probably going to be a part of it. I think that Floyd being on a week before him kind of hurts his pay-per-views, but I'm wondering, do you agree? Do you agree that Jon Jones is that guy? No, is he that guy that the UFC can someday put in a big show like what Floyd is having this weekend?
Right. Considering the current complement, absolutely. I almost envision it being even further out than the current guys we know today, because Floyd Mayweather Promotions is the company. You know, you're never going to get a UFC fighter who has an entire promotional company built around him, and that is where a lot of the ability to create this. Well, yeah, right. But it's all towards the UFC. You know, it's not toward his own pockets necessarily. So you know, yeah. It would be Jon Jones because he actually is the closest guy to checking off that first box I mentioned, which is undefeated, untouchable, creating this aura of, look, if this guy's going to lose, I have to freaking be there. Yeah.
And do you think it hurts him on pay-per-view, the fact that Floyd is coming a week before his fight?
$75 in HD.
Yeah.
$75.
Yeah, I don't know. UFC fans are used to shelling out money almost week after week for pay-per-views. So I suppose, I think what hurts them more is that the UFC has been trying to sell the fight by not really convincing us that Gustafsson can win the fight.
Why is everyone so bothered by the promotion for this fight? Why is everyone so bothered by the reach?
I don't get it
I think
either.
it's a very intelligent way of selling a fight. All day on Twitter, I see people
can't acknowledge
complaining.
that they're not interested in Alexander Gustafsson. They feel
Right.
too proud to acknowledge that. So they criticize the angle the UFC took to sell you Gustafsson. What else are you going to do?
Well, you don't like the promotion?
Well, not so much the promotion, but I think that you've got to put the guy in there. I mean, basically, the light heavyweight division is John Jones, and then a bunch of good fighters who he's beaten, and then the guys who are ranked above the good fighters but below Jones are all the guys he hasn't beaten yet.
Yeah.
And
who aren't big names.
And are just waiting to be beaten by John Jones.
Right.
And so, you know, I think that they're sort of handcuffed. What are they going to do? Of course, they've got Gustafsson. Well, he's tall, and he's that's your line. Sorry.
Yeah.
He's tall, and he's got reach, and he's a good fighter. Not taking anything away from him, but is he any more equipped to beat Jones than Sonnen was, or Belfort was, or Rashad was? Maybe he offers different things, but is he more equipped? Is he a bigger challenge on those guys? I'd say no.
Well, in my opinion, the draw is all about Jones because you just want to keep seeing him dominate. It's not so much about Alexander; it's about Jones. You want to be there in case he loses. You want to be there when he dominates. And I don't know if you guys noticed, but on the conference call this past week, we're starting every time he fights, he gives us a little more, and we're almost peeling through the fakeness to get to the real John. And I think we're as close as ever to the real John, taking shots at Alexander, talking about his fans and not caring about the haters. But it felt very genuine. Did you notice this? And are you as sort of, refreshed by this new John Jones?
I am, actually, because he did go through, I mean, you got to look at his life. It's almost like it came back full circle because I remember him sitting after his first couple fights. I remember Stefan, the Stefan Bonner afterwards, how humble, soft-spoken, and sincere he was at that time. Now, was he really like that? We don't know, because then he went through his whole evolution. They put the foot on the pedal, and he became a champion very quickly. He was still in his young 20s, and he went through a lot of public stuff where he had to play out things in public, and he had people comparing him to Muhammad Ali and things like this. He probably got a little mixed up in his own head, honestly, about who he should be, what he should be trying to do. What I noticed on this call and the whole lead up to this fight is none of that exists. It's almost like he got rid of all those distractions, all those sideline things that were going on that might have been, plaguing him a little bit before. And he seemed very genuine to me. Like he was pointing out, like you said, he was talking about Alex. It was a very matter of fact, it was very matter of fact what we suspect anyway, that he doesn't feel his threat, that sort of thing. To me, it was refreshing because for him to ultimately proceed and to be he's got to be himself. It's not any phoniness, especially awkward phoniness, is not going to translate well going forward for a guy in his position.
It's also a burden for those of us who've been considered dominant and unbeatable and it is a burden at a young age. It's a burden. It sounds like a great burden to have. Everybody thinks you're great, but when everybody thinks you're great, there is a part of a persona that gets built up, and I think that Jones is in the right camp. He's around Greg Jackson every day, and Greg Jackson, the cerebral, almost spiritual leader, has I think helped Jones become more reflective, become more have more of an inner life, I guess, and I think that's. Obviously the guy is a great fighter, but so we're just talking about what he projects and what he brings out into the world, and I think that having that inner life and having that be nurtured and built up can only help him.
Not to mention his brothers being, one of his brothers just won a Super Bowl. I mean, there's a lot of scrutiny and everything on a lot of members of the family. I think just organically you start to become more used to that spotlight as things go on.
I think since Jones fell to his knees in gratefulness after he beat Ryan Bader and they told him he was going to get that unexpected title shot, he's been in a process of telling himself his own story. And he tells it out loud in interviews for everybody to hear. He doesn't, a lot of other fighters don't do that. They'd rather not talk about how great they are. They'd rather be deferential to their opponent and kind of, frankly, dodge questions about the kind of person they are. Or even worse, the kind of person they really are, which is always a dead-end line of questioning. But in terms of John, he's in this exploration process, and he's trying to make sense out of what everyone expects and says about him, but he just says it out loud. for everybody to hear, which is what you're talking about, and why we feel like we're peeling away layers of the onion. And Chuck's point about his brothers is so important. Fox is so high on this kid, and if he beats Alexander Gustafsson, the potential for promoting a title defense on Super Bowl weekend before the Super Bowl game, perhaps against Glover Teixeira, and that tie-in with his brothers, I mean, you know, it would be amazing if some of his brothers were actually in the game.
Wow,
but just the NFL tie-in, that is so fertile for him to be front and center as the face of this sport to the widest audience Fox Sports can muster.
And by the way, I want to see more of this, though. I want to see more cockiness. I want to see him putting down all his opponents, saying, you can't touch me. I want to see more of that. You know, I don't want to see the humble John Jones.
Works for Floyd, sure.
Look at what Conor McGregor did. He made a fight against Max Holloway, arguably the most interesting fight on that card. Look at what Chael Sonnen does. But now this guy, we know he is the Michael Jordan of our sport right now, right?
Humble champs, no thanks. Humble champs, no thanks.
No one's
But
interested.
you also need that challenge. I mean, I'm not sure that Mayweather is a great example because it seems like he is at such a different level than everybody he steps in with. And Jones, to some extent, probably to a great extent, has been the same thing. But in order for the UFC, you know, this question started out as, is Jones the guy that's going to bring the UFC to that level? I do feel that that's going to need to happen as a heavyweight. He's going to need something that's going to look bigger than him, or I mean, literally bigger and also figuratively bigger. If Velasquez, you know, destroys Dos Santos again like he did the last time, and then takes out somebody else and just is not even competitive fight, and then Jones tries to step in and take on the bigger guy, go for it. That'll be a fun thing to see.
The spark from that idea goes back to Jones telling himself his own story out loud, because every time he's been asked about, are you really, really big for 205, going all the way back to when he first won the belt, he'd say, yeah, I'm going to be a heavyweight one day. No, even if you were considering a weight class change in MMA, you don't even mention it. You don't say a word about it because you feel like it takes the focus off your next opponent and it takes the focus off, what is right in front of you. And John Jones has always said, no, I'm going to break Tito's record and then I'm going to go up. And Benson Henderson picked up a little of that, talking about how he's going to beat Anderson's record. You have to talk big. You have to create lofty goals. And if people respond to that negatively, it's just as well, because indifference, as we know, is the absolute worst.
And what I think he needs next is just that Joe Frazier. He needs that Chael Sonnen. He needs a guy who he's going to have a rivalry with, a couple fights, something to really propel him. I don't know if it's going to be Gustafsson. I don't know if it's going to be Glover Teixeira. I think it could be Daniel Cormier, because Cormier is going to really, poke him and get him fired up. You see the way he talks about him. But I think he needs that, right?
That's the only major intriguing name out there for him. I mean, Glover Teixeira would be the next guy who's existent in the division who would, I believe that he is the rightful next challenge for John Jones. Regardless, he's 5-0 in his UFC. Regardless of, the guys he beat, where they cusp, top teners, or where they entrenched top 5 or whatever, it doesn't matter. Look down the list of guys who are in there right now and tell me who's going to sell that more than Glover Teixeira right now. He's beat most of the guys like you were pointing to before. He's either beat the guys, or there are guys like Phil Davis who's winning nickel and dime contests where you're not sure he actually even won the fight. Most people would probably consider his last one a loss. And some guys like Lyoto Machida are like jettison. They're getting out of there. They're not going to stick around. Who else is going to fight? So the guys who are right there right now, it's Glover Teixeira or it's Daniel Cormier. If I'm the UFC, I'd look at Daniel Cormier, because to me, that's the most intriguing fight they could put on.
Yeah, Glover's not the guy. When Glover can only beat the guy who the UFC puts him in with. So, I mean, there is that criticism that he hasn't beaten a top 10 guy, or he hasn't beaten a guy beyond like the cusp of the top 10. But, he's not like he's turning down fights against bigger name guys. That's who the UFC has chosen to put him in with, and now he's won 20 straight fights. So,
It's 19.
Is it 19?
I think so. 19, 20.
19, 20, whatever.
Too many numbers.
He's won every fight.
Whatever. He's won a whole bunch of fights.
He's won every fight he's ever had.
And the other thing and the cool thing about him too is that he's also, in the last 2, I think, he's gotten hurt and then come back and won it. So he also has that kind of resiliency, never say die kind of thing going on. He's been dominant, but not dominant, and almost simultaneously. So yeah, it'd be fun to see him in there.
Jack, one more thing about UFC 165. The co-main event is Renan Barão against Eddie Wineland, interim bantamweight title fight. And also on that 165 conference call, Dana White said, it's getting to that point where if Dominic doesn't come back, for Barão's next fight, he's going to have to be stripped. Are you surprised that they haven't stripped him already? Remember, the last time Dominic Cruz fought was in October of 2011, 2 years ago, essentially. It was on Versus, a channel that no longer exists, against Mighty Mouse, who is now the flyweight champion. A lot has changed. Are you surprised? And also, do you almost think that they should, just for his own sake, just let him build himself back up instead of throwing him in there against a guy who's undefeated for many, many years in a unification bout that might be a little too tough in a fight that you haven't fought in 2 years? That's a tough fight to come back to.
I was a little surprised that they didn't do something after that first knee surgery failed, the cadaver, and it was really a tough break for Dominic Cruz. I mean, what a horrible, you go through all this surgery and you start rehabbing and then it just fails and you got to do it again. That's what happens with ACL replacement sometimes. So I was surprised they didn't make a move then because it was like a double recuperation time all of a sudden. But, credit to him. I think the standard of fairness has been established when it comes to this kind of stuff, from keeping the heavyweight belt on Randy Couture when he up and left to keeping the lightweight belt on Sean Sherk after he failed a steroid test. I mean, there are certainly more auspicious ways to exit as champion, and the UFC keeps you around and still keeps that belt interim. I think they care about there being this guy out there who they called the champion at one point, who they never got any resolution as to whether he is the champ. So, no, I think it's definitely not going to happen that Dominic comes back and fights anybody but the interim champ. Even if if you want to talk to Dominic's interests in terms of rebuilding and in terms of getting his sea legs under him again with a new fight, that's just not the way the UFC views its champions. And well enough. I mean, I wouldn't want to see him fight for the belt.
Yeah, who would you put him in with? I mean, first of all, there was always this kind of this unknown. He was an unknown. Nobody knew when he was going to come back. There was never this thing where he's going to be out for 2 years. We know that. It was almost like a month by month thing.
So you can't do it now. You can't strip him.
Time has sort of evolved. And so you want to bring him back in. Well, you can't bring him in. What are you going to bring him in against Faber, or are you going to bring him in against some guy nobody's heard of? He's the champion. He needs to fight the number one guy. And so what if he hasn't fought for 2 years? If he ends up losing to Barao, well, bring him back again. They let him fight again. But he's a champion. He's got the belt. I don't think the UFC likes to they certainly don't like to publicly have warm up or what do they call it, warm up bouts or whatever.
Yeah.
Tune-up fights.
Tune-up.
Yeah, that doesn't exist in MMA.
They're not going to do that.
It doesn't exist in MMA because you're going to give him a guy who's just like fresh off the Facebook prelims,
But it's a strange sort of thing. And this is one of those cases where you look at the UFC as a model and you look at our sport, it's a here and now sport. It's very strange that a guy like Renan Barão, who could be a star, like a Jose Aldo type, he could be coming up in that way, but yet we have this interim tag on him, which is a weird thing to market. Here's a placeholder. So whose aura is looming over? It was Dominic Cruz's aura looms over everything that Renan Barão does. At some point, it's not fair to Renan Barão to have to go in there with the aura of Dominic Cruz, whom he can't fight. It's not his choice that he can't fight. So the UFC would have every right to strip him at this point, just given how their promotion, their posters, everything else that they do, to say here's our placeholder, here's our interim guy, he's going to stand in for, what I mean? It just, at some point you got to say this is our concrete champion, and when Dominic Cruz is ready, then he can come and challenge for what's rightfully his.
And let us not disrespect Eddie Wineland, who of course is fighting for the belt.
Wineland's fighting.
We always do that. We talk about the champions.
We're talking about John Jones and Cormier as well. We made that mistake. Okay, guys, let's end on this. I know my man Jack will appreciate this. The famous double turn, WrestleMania 13, Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Is it happening right now on The Ultimate Fighter? Is Ronda Rousey going from extreme babyface to heel? We've seen 2 episodes, and then Miesha Tate heel to babyface, coming off very well, I think, after 2 episodes. Is this happening before our eyes?
I don't think so. I think what we're seeing manifested here, if you think everybody loves Ronda Rousey, you don't pay enough attention to a video she puts up on her Twitter or YouTube. People have a big problem with Ronda Rousey. Squeaky wheels, people who can't keep their thoughts to themselves, have a problem with Ronda Rousey in terms of how she comes off and the way she expresses herself. She loves that. She feeds off of that. Dare I say, she needs that. So I think all we're really seeing is this being exposed in an atmosphere where it comes out in a very dramatic and consistent way, and it makes for good television. So I don't know. It would surprise me if people are learning something entirely new about Ronda Rousey through this show. Maybe so. Maybe there's just these very casual assessments of her out there. People who knew she was the first UFC women's champ, got an idea of her from the body issue, maybe got this general sheen about her that she was some kind of pure female athlete, some kind of but she's not. I mean, she's just so gritty, and she's so much more there going on.
Diaz brother.
Absolutely, all the way down to looking away when she's doing an interview. Right. I don't know how I was supposed to be here. I mean, how Diaz is that? But all that said, though, I think I think what I'm trying to say is I don't think Ronda Rousey was the babyface. to turn heel.
Was she the gray character?
Yeah,
Some like
she
her,
was.
some,
Exactly.
But don't you agree that Misha's coming off a lot different? I mean, I think a lot of people are. Why I'm bringing this up is because a lot of people are writing to me and posting on the website and things like that and saying, I'm now rooting for Misha, and I find it surprising after 2 episodes that this is developing.
Well, I want to preface my remark by saying that I am not a reality TV consumer typically.
Sure, you're not.
And I should have used I hate using air quotes, but reality. I mean, reality TV is really manufactured, melodrama, really. And I think that the UFC and Fox joined to be really disrespectful to their champion. The whole way that this show has unfolded with Rousey learning that she's going to be coaching against Misha while the cameras are rolling. This is the kind of thing you do when you've got a bunch of 18 attention-seeking women on The Bachelorette or something. This is not something you do to your world champion. There's something unprofessional about the whole thing. Having said that, and also acknowledging that typically I DVR the show and fast forward to the fights. The reality part of it, I agree that Ronda is a more complex character, and Misha has looked the part of being the better one, but I think that's also manufactured. I mean, how much footage have they shot, and how much do they fit into that hour? So the reality of it is what the UFC and what Fox want to tell us is the reality of it. It's not the reality of what Ronda Rousey is as a person or what Misha Tate is as a person. It's just the reality that so-called reality TV wants to present.
That is the issue with reality TV, but you say something very interesting. You fast forward through the drama.
Yeah, you can do that.
To me, the drama, whatever that is, the reality is mini countdown shows. I mean, the last episode, right, on Wednesday, I was sitting there watching this with my wife, who does not like fighting, who's not interested in tough MMA, any of this. She obviously knows a lot about it because of me. And by the end, she was like, oh, Shayna's gonna kick Juliana's. And then she was legitimately surprised. A, she was into the fight. B, she was surprised. Why? Because of all that was said and all that was shown leading up to, you need that.
I knew that Shayna was gonna lose the fight.
Oh, you did?
Because of the way they were building it up. They were building it up as...
But how did you know how they were building it up if you fast forward through that?
This was the one time I watched... This is because... I've been exposed. No, I had to watch that one because I couldn't... It was only on right before.
But a lot of these people are no-names. One of the good things about Tough is that we know who Shayna Baszler is, right? We know some of these people are Roxanne Modafferi, but a lot of especially the guys who are less interesting to me than the women, they're no-names. Don't you need that reality to be invested in their fight?
I think
not necessarily.
Chris Lee did without the spritzing.
Right.
Yeah, I think this stuff is certainly there's. I'm not presuming that I'm the audience for this. I think there are people that are.
I'm just curious why someone would fast forward and just watch the fight when you don't know.
Because I'm interested in watching the fights. I mean, I'm not really interested in watching, what they're doing in the house, and the one guy talking about how which chick in the house is the hottest and which one.
Of course.
I mean,
Jeff has a lot of company here. I mean, let's not pretend he's an outlier. I mean, in terms of MMA fans, but the fact is, just flat fights alone, there's not enough people interested in that. You need to put more sizzle on that steak.
It's proven in the season premieres each time because it's mostly just fights.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I get very bored by it. Personally, I get very bored by just seeing random people fighting that you know nothing about.
Yeah.
But I was just going to say, getting back to your whole premise, give it time. Because with Ronda Rousey right now, we may be thinking, it's turning around, the storm clouds are rolling over. But Brian Caraway we've seen what the Brian Caraway and Misha Tate thing has done in the past. The fickleness will switch gears, especially when they're preluding the next show, and you see that Brian Caraway is involved against the coach. I have a feeling it's going to switch back and forth on us.
Can we agree though that this is the most interesting season since season 10? Kimbo, Rashad, Rampage. They're real, and this is the 18th season. There hasn't been much to talk about.
I would say so.
I'm into it, and I will admit that I wasn't into it. I've said it many times before. It felt stale. It's 2 episodes. Let's talk about it 7 episodes in. But I think they're 2 episodes in.
Yeah,
I'm eating this up.
They've got something to work with.
Yeah.
It's all about the coach selection. Do the coaches show up wanting to perform, wanting to create conflict? Brock Lesnar showed up, the biggest star the sport has ever seen, didn't feel like fighting with JDS or acting cocky. No one cared.
Yeah.
Roy Nelson and Shane Carwin kind of get along. No one cared. It's what you have to do.
Michael Bisping.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm more apt to watch. I mean, I know nobody watched the Bellator one, but I would watch it sometimes just because I wanted to see Greg Jackson. The guy is a master trainer. I want to see how he performed during the lead up to the fight. I'm not as interested in watching. I know Ronda brings in her real coaches, but we always see the camera's always on her.
Yeah.
I'm not so much interested in seeing how she coaches these other fighters, who some of whom have more experience in the cage than she does. Same with Misha. I'm not that interested in seeing those guys perform though. And I have to say, I do have an ally, in my opinion, and you know this because you and I were having a conversation with some guy named Dana White at the end of the live season of The Ultimate Fighter, and he said to us that he really loved the live season because it was all about the fights, and he said, well, but Fox really likes the reality, so we're going to go with that from now on.
Dare I say it is viewership malpractice to fast forward through the reality.
How about that? Back to the beginning.
Guilty as charged.
Guys, great stuff. Really enjoyed this. Awesome stuff, of course. Now we want to hear from you. And of course, you could do that in the comment section below. Let us know about anything we talked about here today. A lot. We got through a lot here today, guys. May have gone over our usual time, but I've heard that some of you want us to go a little longer. So that was for you, our fans. Let us know in the comments and try to be nice to, Jack. They're very sensitive. Not quite like some of our other panelists. It's been great, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Don't forget, next weekend is UFC 165. MMA Fighting will be there, and then we will return following that event, headlined by John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson. For Jack, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching another episode of the MMA Beat.